Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and welcome to today's session. How are you doing? I pray that all is well with you and your families at this time. So today we're continuing to verse number 11 of this wonderful discussion and illumination that is given by Krishna to Arjuna at this time of his life when he's most distraught, most broken down. And today we're going to hear Krishna speak. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Krishna is going to speak and give him some enlightenment to help him from this deep abyss of life that he's sunk into. So we catch it here. Bhagavad Gita 2.11. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Asochanam vasochastvam pragyavadam sabhashase. Gatasum agatam sumscha. Nanusochanti panditaha. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said. So finally now we're going to hear guidance about life from the spiritual platform. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said. So Krishna is speaking, and when Krishna speaks, he is speaking from the spiritual platform. That's why initially Arjuna could not relate when Krishna told him in 2.2, Kutasva kashmalam idam vishame samupastitam anarya justam asvagyam akritikaram Arjuna. Arjuna, how these impurities have come upon you. So what was those impurities? This is what Krishna is discussing here now. That your impurities is lamentation, grief. These are the impurities that Krishna was talking about in 2.2. Now in 2.11 is going to elucidate that, and now as Guru is going to help Arjuna see his own ignorance. So let's see what he says. So we were hearing Prabhupada saying yesterday that the relationship between Guru and disciple is gravity. So Krishna now has changed his mood from friendship to now gravity. So let's see what he says. While speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. So as we are assessing Krishna and the techniques he's using, he's firstly relating to the human level. Because as God, he can use anything as a weapon. We've seen that. Krishna has used the wheel against Bhishma. He can use his hand when he chopped off the head of that demon in Mathura. So he can use anything as a weapon. But here he's fighting against Arjuna's mind, and here he's using the weapon of logic, rationale, of knowledge. So therefore the first thing he's saying, you're speaking learned words. But that's not the description of somebody who's learned, who's wise, because your behavior is not matching your words. So he's relating to Arjuna right at that level of where he is. So he's telling Arjuna, you're saying one thing, but your behavior is something else. So he's telling Arjuna, I'm relating to you on the human level. Remember, human species is just one kind of form on this planet. The soul has many forms that it takes. 8.4 million forms that it says in Padma Purana. So as the human form now, how do you relate? So Krishna is the master. Yesterday we were saying it's the master class of life. The first thing he's saying to differentiate a human from an animal is that it has knowledge. It can develop wisdom by the process of knowledge. I'm relating to you now as the human species, but your behavior is not befitting a person from the human species. Why? Because you're saying one thing and behaving in another way. So first and foremost, I'm relating to your intelligence and your mind through knowledge. Remember, the senses are also called knowledge acquiring senses. That means knowledge is coming through that, nothing else. Because if you were just an animal kind of person, then what's the value of speaking philosophy? You don't. And Krishna has done that. We've seen in other pastimes in the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. He just kills the demons. He doesn't speak to them. He just destroys the demons. He doesn't speak to them. But now he's dealing with Arjuna's mind. Therefore, he's using knowledge as a weapon. and we'll see the deeper significance of that. So indirectly he's telling Arjuna, you're a good philosopher, Arjuna. Philosopher means he just preaches, oh, it should be like this, But Arjuna's level of knowledge is just from Dhanurveda, the military science. So from Dhanurveda, he's learned the military science under the guidance of Dronacharya, and he's using that as a template for all aspects of life. This is why Krishna is saying, you're speaking like you know. He's saying, hey Arjuna, Panditji, you're speaking like you know, but what have you studied about life? You just studied Dhanurved, the military science, military code, and the highest that can give you is honor, how to be moral, how to be honorable, how to keep to your word. Now you're using that knowledge to argue with me here. There's so many other dimensions that you're not aware of that life exists on. The subtle dimension and the spiritual dimension. And you haven't even contemplated life on that level. You are simply relating to me from the body, and you are arguing with me on the level of the body. So dear devotees, this begs an interesting point here, because Krishna in the translation uses the word mourning. You are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. So then it begs the question, what is worthy of grief? If Krishna is saying this is not worthy of grief, is there something that is worthy of grief? So Krishna is gradually introducing the spiritual dimension. That if one grieves about life for the spiritual dimension, that my efforts in life is not enough on the spiritual dimension, that kind of grief is worthy. That I can do more for myself to develop myself on the spiritual platform. That kind of grief is worthy. So you see, there is also grief that is worthy. So Krishna continues, those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. So what does it mean to be wise? So as we see, as part of the human experience, we are constantly receiving knowledge. And we are constantly dealing with knowledge as data. So we are a biological knowledge processing entity. Everything about us is knowledge. All our five senses give us nothing but knowledge. And where does the five senses connect? It connects to the mind. Therefore, if you want to change the mind, you only can change the mind with knowledge. And now do you see why Krishna is speaking philosophy to Arjuna? Because when dealing with the mind, the knowledge becomes a weapon to change the mind's understanding under the direction of the intelligence. Why? Because on the primary level, the body is getting knowledge from the five senses, and that is going to the mind. Then the intelligence is using that data of knowledge to discriminate what is useful, what is not useful. So that discrimination function is also using knowledge, and then knowledge of the supreme world can actually give us salvation. So we are nothing but biological processing units of knowledge. And therefore Krishna is speaking to Arjuna using knowledge as a weapon so that he can see his own ignorance. Because it's interesting, by the nature of the soul, as Krishna will instruct in the upcoming verses, we are all knowing by nature. The soul is all knowing, it's fully cognizant. So what is the value of knowledge on the spiritual platform? Simply to please Krishna. It's used as a tool to know how to please Krishna, to know what will please him, what will suit him at this time. So we can see here, devotees, that there is a scientific study of knowledge, and that's called epistemology, the study of knowledge, epistemology. So when we study how knowledge works for us, it's very interesting. So devotees, today we're going to show you how to prove that the spiritual level of knowledge exists, that the spiritual dimension actually exists scientifically.
The brain processes 400 billion bits of information a second, but we're only aware of 2,000 of those. But our awareness...
So did you hear that? I'm going to rewind it and we're going to hear it again.
The brain processes 400 billion bits of information a second, but we're only aware of 2,000 of those.
So we just saw that the brain processes 400 billion impulses per second, and we only aware of 2,000 of those. That means everything we know, all the senses, all the functionings of the body, everything, all the working senses, all the knowledge acquiring senses. So we see in this process, the totality of all of that in our human material experience is only 2,000 impulses per second. But under the scanner, the brain is showing 400 billion. So what is the brain being connected to that we can't translate into human experience right now? The brain is connected to other dimensions of reality. The information is coming in, but we haven't developed a skill because we learn everything here. 1, 2, 3, ABC. We learn everything about the world and ourselves. My question to you is, what if what you learned is not the reality of the world? And what is the proof of that? That only 2,000 impulses of that can be recognized. 400 billion. We have no idea where these impulses of knowledge are coming from. And this gives us proof that the brain or the human being has the capacity to connect to the subtle dimension and the higher level, the spiritual dimension. But we haven't learned the technique of how to unpack that as useful information at the human level. Do you see how deep this Aryan culture is? Because it's based on self-realization. It explores the inner self. So see, science and spirituality have connected. So therefore Krishna is telling Arjuna that you know something, but you're not wise. You have information. If that time Google was around, then Arjuna would have Googled it. But Google can't help you at the level of grief to understand life. We need a sentient person. We need to see how a sentient being handles life. Then we can learn through that. Therefore Krishna is telling Arjuna, you are lamenting. Why? Because you're only relating to the level of existence of the body. There are another 2 dimensions, that the subtle body, which is the mind, intelligence and ego, and the spiritual body, which you have no connection with right now. Therefore, you're lamenting only the physical loss. But the person, the spirit soul, has not died. So on your level, your perspective of life, you're only seeing that the body has died. But on reality, the subtle level and the spiritual level, the person has not died. Only the level of the body, that bodily casing, the human body, that has ceased to be. But the living being, the spirit soul, is still existing on the subtle and spiritual dimensions. So therefore, the person has not died. So Krishna goes on to explain this to Arjuna. Let's see what Prabhupada puts in the purport. He says here, the Lord at once took the position of the teacher and chastised the student. So we see the first teaching technique of Krishna. He first sees the emotional state and then he gives logic. He first sees what's the emotional state of Arjuna. He relates to him first at the emotional level. Asochanam vasochastvam. You are socha, you are lamenting. Sochanam means you are lamenting. So I acknowledge that you are lamenting. But by logic, I'm trying to tell you, you are lamenting for something that's not true. The person has not died. Only the bodily experience of that person is no longer. The person actually has not died. So if you're lamenting, you're only stuck on the bodily platform. You're not seeing the subtle nature and you're certainly not understanding the spiritual nature. So Krishna is making Arjuna aware of this. That grief or lamentation on the bodily level is simply based on misunderstanding. The person has not died. They continue to exist on the other dimensions, the subtle dimension and the spiritual dimension. And then Krishna pulls out another trump card. So we see Krishna uses the word mourning. So when one mourns, that means somebody has died. So you see the difference between mourning and lamentation. What is the difference between lamenting and mourning? Mourning means it's because of death. And that's why Krishna is using the word mourning there. Isn't that so beautiful? Because he's telling Arjuna, you're mourning because your understanding is that the person has died. But actually the person has not died. It's only the body that no longer exists. Therefore he's using the word sochanam, that your mourning is a misunderstanding. It's not appropriate. Therefore, he's saying you're not wise. To actually understand, you need wisdom. Right now, you only have information or knowledge, but you need wisdom to see the difference between mourning and lamentation, between death of the body and the continuous existence of the soul. So once Krishna has acknowledged his emotional state, then he uses that same state back at Arjuna, because Arjuna is a Kshatriya and Kshatriyas value honor a lot. So if you dishonor a Kshatriya, it's something that's very provocative. So Krishna, knowing that, so to get Arjuna's mind to shake out of this lamentation, he insults him. Not a nice thing to do, but Krishna is working on his mind. So he's telling him, oh, you are speaking learned words, but you don't know what is worthy of grief. You're speaking like a big Pandit here. Panditji, you're speaking like a big learned person, but you don't know what is worthy of grief. So he insults him at the same time. So with one sentence, Krishna does two things. He insults Arjuna at the same time, as we were saying yesterday, because of intimacy, Arjuna would not respond in a provocative way because he knows this is covered with love. It's gravity, but it's covered with love.